Red Ice Radio. My name is Henrik Palmgren. Thank you for tuning in. You can, of course, find us online at redicecreations.com. Go there for much more radio, news, video interviews, films, links, and other resources. And today we have Aelous Kephas with us. He is the author of The Lucid View, and you might also have come across his podcast, Stormy Weather. Aelous has a few websites that you can take a look at right away and follow along here during our program today. His main website, or his blog rather, is simply aelouskephas.blogspot.com. And for his podcast, you can take a look at kephas.podmatic.com. And we will have these links up on Red Ice Creations, of course, in case you have troubling with the spelling of his name there. But so you can find them more easily, and you take a good look around. There's a lot of material up there for you. And we've invited Aelous today to meander around a few different topics related to the conspiracy movement, the 60s, and the new counterculture movement. We're also going to talk a little bit about the control of the high magicians. We're also going to discuss Aelous' podcast and his decision to end the podcast, and much more. And there will probably give us. We will probably go into some interesting avenues here today with Aelous. So thank you very much for coming on the program. It's nice to have you with us.
Oh, not at all, Henrik. I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
You know, briefly, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been involved or interested in these so-called esoteric subjects for some of our listeners that might not be familiar with you or your work, Aelous.
Well, initially I was, you might say, hurtled into the arena of alternate perceptions, sorcery, magic, through disappointment in love. Just to get briefly personal there, I think that for many of us we need some kind of personal impetus to seek alternate ways of looking at life. And I suffered a sort of disappointment in love, and that drove me to an astrologer that I felt would be able to counsel me. His name is Lynn Birkbeck. I interviewed him on Stormy Weather, and it was Lynn who recommended to me very strongly the works of Carlos Castaneda. And I would say that those books opened the floodgates, as it were, to a whole other world of imaginal possibilities. And that was really that was it. There was no going back from that point on. I read all the books within a very short period of time, and began a quest that I've continued to this day. It's for the last over 20 years now. So one thing led to another, you might say. Discovering the world of sorcery, the reality of sorcery, alerted me to the realization that there were many areas of life, of reality, that I'd overlooked, and so I began to look at these areas with a new openness, you might say, and that included UFOs and parapolitics and all the rest.
So when did you decide to start up your blog?
The blog was hard to say now. I guess it was about 4 years ago that I initially started the blog, but there wasn't an awful lot going on there until more recently. It was just a site to, I suppose, publicize my book, and I didn't get heavily into blogging until the last 6 months or so.
So maybe we can get into some of these areas that we had. We could, of course, go into the avenue of talking about your book, but you wanted to go into a few other areas here today, Aelous. And one of these is about the general conception about or idea about the conspiracy movement, or the people who are interested in esoteric ideas, and I guess also the dangers that you've mentioned of packaging these ideas as a means to reach a wider audience. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that for us and set the backdrop of what you mean when you say that.
Well, it's hard to separate like personal feelings from more general feelings. I guess I'm always suspicious of just generally of ideas that are being propagated widely, and I think I mean, because of blogging and podcasting within the last few months, I just became a lot more actively involved with what I term the alternate perceptions community, and so I began to pay much closer attention to what was going on there, and I just very quickly began to realize that there was these recurring narratives that ran through most, if not all, of the different areas that were being discussed, and that in itself made me a little bit suspicious. I was just thinking, I mean, this has become particularly prevalent in the last year or two with all of these movies that have been coming out. There's been Zeitgeist, and there's been The End of America, there's been Wake Up Call. I've got a list of them somewhere here. There's quite a few of them. The Esoteric Agenda. And they all more or less are pushing the same narrative that most, if not all, of your listeners will be familiar with, which is the global banking and the 9/11 inside job and the implant, the microchip, the sabotage of our food products. You more than anyone is very, very familiar with this. I call it a narrative because essentially what we do as researchers is we pick out certain elements and we choose to emphasize them because there's so much going on in terms of conspiracy, as in covert control. There's so many different areas that one could look at. And so if we choose to focus on particular strands, let's say, of the agenda and bring them, highlight them and emphasize them, then we create a narrative. We create perhaps the illusion of order where there may be an order, but it's not the order that we're discovering. One way I describe it is like we're joining the dots before we have all of the dots. We discover certain things about manipulations and agendas, and we gather those findings together and we think, okay, that's quite a lot of dots now, let me try and join them. And so when we join the dots, we create an image, which is what I call a narrative. But the thing is if we've only got, say, 1% of the total amount of dots, or even if we've got 50%, which seems highly unlikely, the image that we draw is going to be a false image. And it may be that those dots or these items, these revelations that we're discovering, they may have actually been placed there deliberately by by our handlers, let's say, by the hidden controllers, the sorcerers, as I refer to them, precisely so that we emphasize them and then join the dots, and then we end up creating a picture that is not actually true, and that was actually placed there deliberately so that we would draw this narrative. So then the question is, are we in fact serving the ends and upholding a narrative that pertains to the very people, the very forces that we claim to be attempting to expose? And that's a question that I had to ask myself.
I think it's a good question that everyone should definitely ask themselves. And speaking of Zeitgeist, by the way, we had an article up here on Red Ice Creations right now about Mr. Joseph, Peter Joseph, who is behind the movie Zeitgeist, which had this mass meeting, if you will, just the other day or yesterday, I guess it was done. And this will be a little bit offset from when we actually record this program, but for the record, I can say March 16th, this article was published in the New York Times, where it actually is mentioned a little bit about what these meetings, what they're doing, how they're trying to have their ideas about what the future will look like and so forth. But anyway, a little piece of this inside the articles basically took up this thing with September 11th. The article says that in the film, the first Zeitgeist film, they elaborated on this idea that September were an inside job perpetrated by a power-hungry government on its witless population. And the article goes on to say a point of view that Mr. Joseph has said he has recently moved away from, which I think is quite interesting. What's your take on that, Aelous?
Well, I don't know enough about it, Henrik. Did it give any more details about where he'd moved to and why?
Nope, nothing like that at all. They just moved on in the article, at least. So, and I guess that what you might be alluding to there is that we have this incredible, message, an overarching overview message that is incorporated into Zeitgeist that have gotten a whole lot of people interested in this, but now they're kind of, if you will, then leading it down a different path, it seems like, to me at least.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we consider, if we allow the possibility that 9/11, just to use this as a very obvious dramatic example, if we allow the possibility that that was all staged, that there was a piece of theatre, what I call Masonic sorcery theatre, in order to alter the consciousness of the collective and to rewire it, reconfigure it, you might say, towards new ends. We also have to consider the possibility that the whole inside job, conspiracy, revelation, that this is all part of the theatre also. That's all part of the plan. It's like we're being led. We're being led through this maze, and we're given the illusion that we're actually choosing which way to go. But actually, as I say, these clues are all being planted. I mean, so much of this stuff is coming from insiders who are supposedly whistleblowers. But how do we know that? You know, 9/11, the nature of 9/11, as with the JFK assassination, the murder of Diana, it's so obvious to those of us who know as soon as it happens that something isn't right. But then there's that awareness that there's going to be a percentage of the population who are going to know in their bones that something isn't right, and so they're going to want to dig deeper. So it makes sense, stands to reason, that they would have already planted a whole bunch of clues that are not necessarily false, but they would be red herrings in the sense that they were planted in order to be discovered, so that we would then, even when we went deeper, we would weave the narrative that was already intended by the Masonic sorcerers as part of their theatre.
That's a very interesting perspective. I've been pondering upon a few of these things myself in regards to, let's take Building 7, for instance, something that is so obviously kind of, what do you call it, erroneous, or so such a huge thing in this whole picture that just begs for people to look into it, for those who discovered that in fact the third building went down that day, for instance. Is that the type of example you're talking about here?
Well, it's certainly related, because it's what I would call, well, it's kind of ties in with the revelation, the method. It's just very difficult. So the James Shelby Downard theory, or Michael Hoffman, and it's a very esoteric one, and it's very difficult to really describe the intricacies of it. But I mean, in its most profane sense, it's simply letting us see the strings so that we actually become slowly acclimatized to this kind of sorcery, this kind of control. And so that, you know, you could see that as a basic political end. They let us see what's going on, but in such a staggered way that it doesn't cause people to actually wake up en masse, but it creates a growing split between those who are willing to look at what they see and go deeper, and those who aren't willing, and so it has the opposite effect on them. They glimpse a crack in consensus reality, and it frightens them. It's so bold, and it's so right there in their face, that they have to paper over that crack no matter what. And so when it's something that huge, you're talking about Building 7, the degree of self-deception, of denial, the degree to which people have to suppress what they actually know in their bodies, in their guts, is so great that it's kind of what's termed as crazy making. It creates a split between the person's conscious mind and their unconscious mind, because they're seeing with their own eyes that something isn't right, but then they're fed this official line and to their conscious mind, and because they're so desperate to cling to the illusion that things are what they seem, even if it's as superficial and as misguided as we can trust our government, which of course is becoming less and less. You know, there's less and less people who are that deep in denial.